Hi, it's Mike. In this video we're going to have a look at a real-world example of where I've used Windsor to implement an extension point for a pipeline component. So in the example here, this is if you saw the article I did a while back on the CRM stream download pipeline component. So this was exactly that. The component here has did exactly what the blog article talks about, but as often happens in BizTalk development, I had my nice generic pipeline component that does this download, and then a requirement came along that wanted to do, I was using it in 2 or 3 places, and the new requirement is, we've got this one special case where we want to do something a little bit different. And in this case, what I needed to do was to manipulate the fetch XML that came through the pipeline and into the message into this pipeline component. And the idea was that there'd be some kind of token in the XML, and I'd want to replace that with a dynamic value that would change depending on the situation. So there's a couple of ways you can solve that, and typically with BizTalk I might have done another pipeline component that would sit in front of this one and manipulate that message, or I could have wrote the most common thing I would see would be somebody would take a copy of this pipeline component, paste it into a new class, give it a different name, and it would now become a specific version of that pipeline component. And if it was a good developer, they may refactor the code a bit so it becomes a bit more reusable. But the key point here is that the first choice with the original pipeline, the original extra pipeline component, just to do that manipulation, might work. But then if you're doing it in a streamed fashion, it can also be quite difficult to get everything happening in the right order, and especially when this pipeline component's replacing that stream and doing some stuff with it, it can be quite painful to get it right. So what we really want here is to be able to sort of have a dynamic extension point in this pipeline component that we can say, well, if you think about the things we're doing, so the first thing is we're reading a message, then we're going to use that XML to call out a CRM, and then we're going to set the stream up to do a stream download. So what my extension point here was, after we read the original message, we want to manipulate that message, and in the bit where I think, if I remember right, what I was going to do was add a tag to wrap around the data we pull out of CRM. And I think, if I remember right, it was actually the wrapper that I want to dynamically manipulate what's in that header element. So if you imagine I'm using this pipeline component in 2 places, and I want to kind of do something like put a value from the context or something like that in it, that became quite a good opportunity to use the container, because what I could do is see here, if we go into the pipeline component, we get to this point where we've got the start wrapper extension. So what I can do is specify a property that would go into the pipeline configuration. So if we take a look at that, and in the pipeline I added this new property called XML wrapper start extension, and I specified it like just a key here. So I said this thing called add feed name to XML wrapper. Add feed date to XML wrapper. So that was a value I'd specified in the message context. I want to kind of pull it out and populate it into that XML. And what I could do is that means I could have a different extension name for every instance of the pipeline component. So if you imagine, when I'm executing it for this pipeline here, I've got that key there. We come down and we go to the BizTalk container, and I've gone, right, get me an instance of iCRM download XML wrapper manipulator. Bit of a long name, but it kind of says what it does. And I've passed in the value of the XML wrapper extension, so that value that we've got from the pipeline config. And we'll get an object back. If we get nothing, we just ignore it and pass the original wrapper. But if we get if we get an object back from the container, then I'm going to call on to this amend XML wrapper and pass in the pass in the BizTalk message and pass in the start XML, and then I'm gonna continue down and do my setup of the call to CRM and set the download stream for processing the message. So what that means is when my containers installer runs, I can register a couple of objects here, and in this case I've registered one against iCRM download XML wrapper manipulator, and I've said it's going to be that class here. But what I've done this time that's different to the previous blog post was you can actually have named instances in Windsor as well. So when I add it to the container, I can add multiple classes that implement that interface, and then when I go to resolve one, I can say, well, give me the one that's been given this name, and that'll kind of control which class I get back. So that means for every instance of that pipeline component, I can specify a different key, and each time I can pull back a different class to do something. So in this case, I could, if we look at the extensions here, so we're looking at this one here, I can execute this one, which will basically just pull something out of the message context and replace a key in the message. But I could have another one that might do something completely different, and I can just write that little bit of logic in its own self-contained class, and then from the pipeline component I can just like runtime through the config specify which one that instance should execute. So it gives me a really good dynamic plug-in model, and that gave me a really cool way of keeping that pipeline component very generic, but adding some instance specific logic that I could use sometimes but not all, and it kind of saved me having to write a whole new pipeline component effectively. And I think that was one of the examples where I think Windsor can add a lot of value to your BizTalk solution by just giving you the ability to develop these kind of plugins.